Let's go ahead and dive right in. Dustin, I'm just curious to just get kind of a glimpse into your story with money. Was this kind of something you were always passionate about?
Yeah, it was. Early on, I think growing up in a home that was pretty dysfunctional with money, I think the
Mhm.
more I deal in this world of finances, the more you get to hear people's story. I was like a lot of you maybe out there that grew up where fear kind of dictated a lot of how our family grew up with money. And so those are a lot of the emotions and a lot of the feelings that I think about when I think about money growing up. And so I always remember as kind of the firstborn paying attention throughout my childhood, like, okay, I really don't like how that was done. Okay, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
So always kind of trying to be mindful of that. And then as I got older, always having a passion for saving and trying to dictate a different future for than what I grew up with. And so yeah,
Yeah.
I've always been very passionate about it for sure.
That's awesome. Yeah. So kind of started from your childhood feeling, I guess, the anxiety or the stress of a lack of money.
Yeah,
So yeah, did that kind of carry on into as you got older? Like you were feeling that weight still?
it did. What a good question, because I've been married 22 years to my amazing wife, and she's kind of had to deal with a lot of the scars of the things I brought into our marriage, kind of unknowingly, things that I
Mm.
brought in, that fear-based mindset. And for those of you who are listening out there, I might encourage you to do this if you're driving or wherever you're at, is just stop and kind of close your eyes and think about the one emotion that you had growing up in your home as it relates to finances. And most of the time, when I ask clients this, they can come up with it like in a second. Usually there's two or three emotions, but stop and think about the one emotion. And as I've tried to delay to give you time to think about it, I will tell you very quickly when I thought about that exercise years ago, the number one emotion that dictated how I saw money was fear. It was
Mm.
lack. It was this constraint and this emotion of poverty and fear. Even though we weren't in poverty, we lived with
Mhm.
this overwhelming sense of fear. And so I get married to my amazing sweetheart, who's the most giving person that I know. And anybody guess what her number one emotion was growing up in her home with money? Jonathan, any guess?
Man, if she's generous, you have to be joy and giving and
Yeah. So
abundance. Yeah.
before I could even finish the question, she just said, fun. Money's fun. And I thought that just describes so much of our disconnect in marriage for
Little
the first
different.
10 years.
Yep.
You have a guy who grew up with fear, and you have a lady who grew up thinking money is supposed to be fun and enjoyed and given whenever you get it. So, to answer your question, it absolutely dictated a lot of our marriage, especially the early years of our marriage.
Yeah. Oh, that's so interesting. uh, just the two different approaches there. When did
Absolutely.
so like take me back to the beginning of your marriage. So you got
Yeah.
somebody bringing that in. This money is fun, and then somebody bringing it in with fear. How did that kind of play out for you guys, kind of in a practical way?
Yeah, I wish I could give you the really good Christian response that, God reigned in it all and I handled it really maturely and led well, but that wasn't the case. I think I led out of fear a lot. And quite frankly, it
Mm,
kind of strangled my wife emotionally, because she's the most giving person that I know. She wants to be free with her money. She lives with her money that comes into her hands as her hands are wide open. She's not clenching it. And
yeah.
so I admire that. But when it comes to me and all the money that would come in our first 10 years of marriage, it was extremely challenging because now I'm being called out by the woman I love to handle it differently. So I just wasn't equipped to do it, quite frankly. But I will say
Wow.
that her prayers and her grace, she wouldn't nag me. She would pray. And after about 11 years, God finally got a hold of my heart and I think blew open the windows of heaven as it relates to
Yeah.
our finances. But it was in large part due to her grace and her prayers for me and our family.
Wow. Wow. That's amazing. And just so, yeah, beautiful of just the patience and everything.
Yeah,
And yeah, I mean, just so and I know when you first said it, you're growing up with fear, you're learning to save. I think that's a tricky part, right? Because you're like, I want to be
yeah,
responsible with my finances, I want to
right,
save, I want to
yeah,
plan, and so you're coming at it with that approach. So how did
yeah.
that kind of what was the tension there of I want to lead in terms of my savings, but I also want to end up being a little more generous and giving because that's what my wife, that's how she sees money.
Sure. Yeah, really good question. I think, if I were to boil this down for those of you who maybe are driving or just listening and are taking notes, there's really four things you can do with your money. You can save it, you can invest it, you can give it, or you can spend it. That's
Mm,
essentially kind of the
yeah.
four buckets of what you can do with your money. And for those of you who are younger out there, I'm thinking, late teens, early 20s, maybe even early 30s. I can say that as a 45-year-old, you're young to me. That, I think the biggest mistake I made growing up, besides the piece we've already talked about, living more out of fear, is I saved too much. Right now, interest rates are really low. So for those of you who are trying to get traction and you're living out of fear and you're just doing what I did growing up, I had a bunch of jobs growing up and I would just save money. Well, right now with inflation at 10 to 12%, if you're earning 1% on your money, you're literally losing, you're guaranteed to lose 10% per year to
Mm,
purchasing power. So it might make you feel good to save money, but really mathematically, you're losing money. You're losing purchasing power. So I guess one of my practical tips would be don't save as much, invest and give more. And that was
wow.
one of the biggest mistakes I made early on, even before I was married, is out of fear. I'm saving to see my bank account grow, but I wasn't
Mm,
investing in stocks, wasn't investing in equities, which I should have been. And I
yeah.
wasn't as giving as I should have been as well.
Mm. No, that's really good, man. That's really good. I would be curious. So kind of you mentioned about 11 years into your marriage and things kind of flipped for you. Just take me back to that moment. What was it kind of that happened at that changed your mindset a little bit towards money?
Boy, how long do you have? Because I could take a half an hour on this one alone. I'll try to be brief because I'm really passionate about it. I feel like for the guys out there that are listening that are kind of trying to run their finances in their own strength, out of their own will, out of their own might and willpower. I played that game. I lived that life. I managed the checkbook better than anybody. I tried to dictate my finances. I tried to create wealth and honor God, but really I was the one who was dictating my finances, if I'm being honest, for the first 10, 11 years of our marriage. And I know what kind of dead end that led to, so I can speak to that with a different kind of authority because I've lived that life. Along that 10 years, I led a lot of Dave Ramsey's Financial Peace University courses. So for those of you who don't know, it's about a 13-week course, often through churches where you pay $89 to $129. You have a lifetime membership to any course in the country forever. So that's pretty cool. And the statistics are on it. If you walk through that 13 weeks, you're likely to pay off about $5,000, or I'm sorry, you're likely to pay off $3,000 of debt in that 13 weeks, and on average save about 4 to 5,000. So that's like a $7,000 to $8,000 swing in your
Mm,
finances in just 13 weeks. It's pretty crazy.
wow.
So I led that, and when I say led that, Dave's doing the teaching, but I'm leading the before and the after, and trying to help hold couples accountable to live this stuff out and actually get traction. And so it became very, very challenging for me, Jonathan, where I'm leading these courses and I'm hearing the messages on tithing, and I'm hearing the messages about God is in control of your finances. And I just could no longer take the disconnect internally that I lived
Wow.
most of this stuff correctly, but I could not look myself in the mirror and say that I'm actually a giving person and I'm trusting God with the tithe, which he commands in Matthew 3. And also I remember after almost every course, I would have multiple women come up to me. It was never the guy. And this is over
Mm,
several years. Ages 20, they've been married 1 year, or 30 or 40, they've been married 20 years, or even late in their 60s. And women are coming up, tearing up, crying. Can you pray for me and my husband? What should I say to my husband? And in every case, it was the husband holding back the marriage. It was the husband holding
mm,
back the wife. She wanted to
wow.
give more and she wanted to live more. But according to
Wow.
her, again, 20 years old to 60, didn't matter. She felt like her husband wasn't leading well and was living out of this fear, poverty mindset, and it was strangling her. It was choking her, and she didn't know what to do about it. So I'm not the brightest bulb in the pack, but I had enough of those conversations where I started to really think, what is the Lord doing in my heart? And what is my wife feeling? And I remember at
Hmm.
one of those times I went to my wife and she teared up as well. And she said, unfortunately, she was feeling a lot of what those other women were saying. And I thought, my goodness, how humbling that I'm leading these courses and I'm not even leading my family well. And I'm not
Wow.
letting God reign in my finances well. And so from that moment, kind of dictated the rest of our future. And we started living differently by that at that time.
That is a powerful story, man. Wow.
Yeah.
So powerful. And just so eye-opening, I think, for a lot of guys, because I think we hear this, hey, you're the money maker. You're supposed to provide for your family. You're supposed to be in charge of the finances. And so even to me, as I'm hearing that, I'm like, the temptation is no doubt to hold on to your finances
Yeah.
because you've worked so hard for it. And we have so much pride attached, right, to how we're providing for the family and how we're making
Right.
money. And so it's like it has this tendency where we just grab it and hold on to it and just say, I want to protect this.
Yes.
Um, and I think, you're thinking that you're doing that out of, you're providing well for your family and you're saving and you're doing this for your family. But what's crazy is what you're saying is that a lot of the women are feeling like that is actually, putting a stranglehold on the family and is not leading well.
Yeah.
When we may think it is leading well, but it's actually not. So what would you say to a guy who's feeling that pressure of like, I got this money, I've worked so hard for it, I'm trying to hold on to it because I'm trying to, with good intentions, I'm trying to provide for my
Yeah.
family. Kind of, yeah. What would you say in that case? After
You bring
talking
up
to all
such a
these
good
women.
point, and a lot of times at our firm at Accelerated Wealth, we talk about the difference between intent and execution. So
Mm,
what you just mentioned is, hey, my intent is good. I want to provide for our family, and we know what the word says about men who don't provide for their families. And so, gosh, how do I try to provide for my family and have a good intent, but also have a good execution?
right.
And at least in my story, I felt like my intent was good, but what I did was literally limit what the Lord could do in our finances. And so, because I was trying to create all of this financial freedom by my own strength, it felt like what you just said. It felt like it was all on me. My
Mm,
wife wasn't even included in a lot of it. I mean, I would say she was, but at the end of the day, it was like it all stopped with me. So the pressure and the weight of that, it just wasn't sustainable. And I think, quite frankly, for those of you for the listeners who are believers out there, it's not intended to all be on your shoulders. If you think that you're the creator and the owner of the finances in your family, I can predict that you're going to be way more stressed with money than you should be. And God is not calling you to carry that cross. So the first and maybe the last thing I would say is, for those of you who are feeling stressed with money, who are feeling the weight, and your intent is good, your heart is good.
hmm
When you're at church and you're talking to a guy over coffee about your finances, you sound good, but your execution isn't good. So please hear my heart on that. Your intent is good, but your execution isn't. And I think that, at least for me, when I that 2011, when my intent was good, my execution stunk. I was
mm,
dealing strictly out of earthly math, and there was no room for the Lord to do his work supernaturally in our finances. And it wasn't until I gave up
wow.
control and started to tithe faithfully that the windows of heaven blew open in my finances and, quite frankly, in my heart.
That is so good, man. That is so good. Oh, wow. Thank you for sharing. Because I think,
Now, can I just add that it sounds good,
yes.
Jonathan, and I appreciate that. But for those of you who are out there, I think we need to spend some time on just how difficult that
Mm,
transition was for me. It wasn't like I
yeah.
heard from the
Yeah.
Lord, the angels were singing, and I'm skipping into church writing tithe checks. There
Yeah.
was a death that occurred, and there
Wow.
were multiple deaths that occurred. And I'm using that word very, very strategically, because there were parts of my heart that I had clung to at that time for multiple decades. That fear, I've got to create everything in my own strength. So when I decided to tithe, in Jesus' name and trust his word. That's the only time in the entire scripture that the Father of the universe challenges us to test him and see if he won't blow open the windows of heaven and pour out a blessing for us that we can't even contain. That's the only time he challenges us to test him. And so literally I had to figuratively and literally die to myself and everything that was built up in my heart to then experience that promise of what he offered to me. So I just want to make sure to connect with people who are out there thinking like, you don't know how hard it is for me. You haven't lived my walk. Trust me, I know the death that occurs to take that leap.
Wow. Yeah, just a powerful story. And I think what you said about intentions and execution is crucial. And I think, when we talk about on this show, it's the Intentional Man podcast. I think so many times, and this was the story in my life, like I've had so many good intentions in my life. I've wanted to be a good person. I've wanted to love people. I've wanted to serve, I want to be generous. Those are truly the desires of my heart. But so many times, if that doesn't line up with your actions, if that doesn't line out with what's actually the result, then it's kind of empty, right? It's like we can be good intentioned people and the execution can be off. And that's not a reflection that I'm a bad person. It just means that, I need to get more intentional with my finances. I need to actually have more of a plan with my finances. I need to think through, I need to bring my wife in on my finances, that's being intentional with them instead of, and I think it can be so personal sometimes where I feel like, oh, man, I'm trying to do this. I'm trying to do well. She doesn't understand. People don't understand. I'm working my butt off. I'm trying to make money, and those are all good. Like I affirm that is a good passion and a pursuit. But the execution and being humble enough to step back and say, okay, actually, we're not getting the results that we want. And I actually am realizing in my life now that I'm holding on, way too strongly to this.
Yeah. And I think that's such a good point. I think kind of the scoreboard test of just you and your quiet time or however you have that, whether it's with the Lord or yourself, and you literally look at the scoreboard of your finances. And I'm not talking about your net worth. I'm talking about the emotion that you feel as it relates to money in your home. Is there more life? Is there more freedom? Or is there more death and frustration? Wow. And when you look at it that way, I think that can really help give you a good litmus test. And you'll know the answer to that question very quickly. If it's not life and it's not freedom and it's not peace, then something's off there. Perhaps God's trying to get at your heart and trying to have you do it more his way and not your way.
First of all, I would just love to hear like your mindset about money, like the purpose of money. What comes to mind when you're asked that question?
So I'm a person of faith. So, we're sure that's been a conversation on here a lot. So, but my take is that money is a tool to help my fellow humans. So I look at money as it's just a vehicle. I never have put too much emphasis on it. I grew up in a family around here that was fairly prominent, and we had a lot of we had a lot of assets. We had the mall. We did a lot of development. We've been involved in Northern Colorado for almost 100 years as different entities or iterations of my family, I guess. And so I've always come from a place that I knew we had some assets as a family. I got involved in our family business, so then I got to understand that at a deeper level. But I have never once looked at money as something that I wanted to obtain. I know I need it. I know I need it to feed my 4 teenage boys at my house, and I seem to need it more of it all the time to feed those kids. But I've always looked at it as it's very much a tool, and it's very much a tool to help other people. At the heart of capitalism, which is the system we live in, I feel like that is, in essence, service to one another. I have something that you need, and if I provide something really well to you, you're willing to part with your green earned money to give it to me. And the same is true, but that requires service. That requires me to serve you. And we have to mutually agree that what I'm doing for you is worth what you're willing to say your labor is trading for me. So I look at it very much like this is an important part of life together. This is really an important part of living in our world together, that if I don't if I don't serve you well, then money is it's just something to be obtained. It can have all the connotations of evil around it. It can have all the greed and the stuff that comes with it. I try to look at that very differently and say, if I don't look at this as something in a way to serve others, then it really isn't, it's of no value to me then.
Yeah. Wow. That's really good. Has that, you mentioned growing up in a family like that, was that kind of your family values? Has this always been kind of your mindset, or has that morphed or grown over time?
I hated actually growing up here because when I was a kid, our name was on a lot of things like real estate companies and buildings. And I just didn't like it at all. Actually, I was very uncomfortable with it. I didn't have any interest in that being a part of what defined me. So I left and went to Canada to go to college, to get as far away from here as I could go. And so, yeah, my family probably had those values in there. Like we definitely we weren't showy people by any stretch of the imagination. My dad's not a showy person. My family, my mom, my grandpa, my grandma, they were not showy people at all. But I just felt like I didn't understand, even though we weren't showy people, our name was everywhere. So it was like, I'm not really reconciled to this and I don't like it. So I left. And I found some friends that actually started to embrace me, for my musicianship, for my just kind of wit and humor. And they were my friends, and they had no idea what my background was. And so then when we started doing stuff, we were traveling and playing on the road, I ended up being the guy that was really in charge of getting the tour together. And I had to kind of become good with money, but I really quickly learned that whole situation was about service to other people. Like there was I was serving my friends who were riding around in the car with me, and we were having fun and we were having a great time. That was really fun for us to do. But also when we would play our shows or concerts or whatever, there was this whole transaction that was happening between us and the audience. And I just that's where I kind of really learned about money and what did it mean to me? Because up until that point, it just was this kind of awkward thing that I had to deal with, and I didn't really care for it. So,
yeah. Oh, that makes sense. And so you're in college and you're touring around and everything. You're handling the money. I guess in that situation, you probably didn't have as much money as you did when you were growing up, and so you're living differently, frugally. Did you really learn how to manage your personal finance as well at that time? Was like the first time you had to really take ownership of that?
Yeah, I had a $500 Visa card that I'd gotten in college. That was my credit limit, was $500.
Okay.
And so we didn't, it might as well have been 5 million because I didn't have $500 to pay anybody anything. Yeah. So I had to learn how to use that. I did every night when I'd get off, when we'd finish the show, this would be whatever time it was, go back to where we were staying, whether that was a friend's house or we were staying at a hotel or whatever we were doing. And I'd get out the books, and it was basically a ledger I had bought at Target. And I'd take the receipts from the day for the gas, for the food, for the different things, and I'd put those all in an expense column, and then I'd put an income column together. And then back then we weren't taking credit cards or anything. It was all cash or checks. So you were trying to figure out how to balance all this stuff and put it together. And then I would know, it's kind of a funny story. My buddies and I still laugh about it a lot, but there was one night we finished a show, we got to where we were going, and I'm like, we have $5 for dinner for all of us.
For all of us.
Yeah, for all of us. And so we went to the gas station because that I thought might be the best place to get dinner for at least 5 or 4 of us. And my buddies came back in to the car and they bought a 3-foot tall alien cup full of Pepsi. And that was the $5. And they thought I was joking. And I'm like, well, that's dinner. So,
that's dinner. It's the life of a musician, man.
But I loved it because it really taught me a lot about, look, saving is important, but also that story is actually illustrative of what happens because I thought it was funny, right? It was like money was just this kind of thing. And did we go hungry that night? Yeah, but we had a good laugh about it. We have a great story that came out of it. Yeah. Our friendship got deeper, and there was a lot of things that happened out of this silly $5 alien cup that I feel like those lessons are really valuable. And I think that started my sense of like, I want to use money to live generously. I don't have any sense in, if I take it with me, I can't. So I also, I want to be good to people around me. I want to live a way and that time was really kind of when it started for me, was that I wanted to live it in such a way that when somebody would ask, hey, I need money. And I need it for something, or I need it to try something, or I need it to do a business or whatever. I always wanted to be the person that could give that money to them, or loan that money to them, or do something so that they could get from where they were to where they wanted to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, I love that. And I think we've talked about that on the show, some of just having a greater vision for your life and a greater vision beyond just the material and beyond just the things that are, that you desire. And so I love that. And that's why I asked you to be on the show, because I've seen that you've modeled that very much, of being very generous. And it's been something that I really admire. So for somebody who is in a place where they're in college or they're young adults or whatever, and they don't have a lot of money, but they want to use money as a tool to serve people, like, how do you develop that when you don't have a lot? How do you start that journey of saying, I want to be generous, I want to serve, just in a young age, or in a poor, or not poor, but where you don't feel like you have a lot of excess?
Well, it sounds a little cheesy, but goals are certainly something that you want to put out there.
Yeah.
I never put a number on that. I never said I want to be a millionaire, or I want to be, that was never part of what I did. But I always felt like, look, if I want to be, if that was what I want to be, because I feel like that's how in the society we live in the United States of America, and I'm a Christian. So if I'm going to try to reconcile all these things together, what's the best way for me to do that? Well, it's probably going to be through generosity. It's probably not going to be through, I'm probably not going to find myself in the middle of hardship, in poverty. I'm not going to be in that setting. But if that means that, if that's the case, then that means that whatever is my station, I need to be really good with that. I need to be really open to that. And so that's kind of where it started for me, was set a goal, say that I wanted to be that kind of person, that's the kind of faith and sort of, just the kind of life I wanted to live. Set that out there. And I think, it's really easy. And I think when I was young, it was really easy to do it, to go in two directions. One was overspend and I remember getting my first credit card and like, hey, great, it's free money, kind of felt and you go do it. And then you realize these guys are going to call me and they're going to like ask me to pay this back. And if I don't pay it, I don't like this feeling. It's going to be really annoying. And I didn't want that. The other side of it is really tempting too, to just be like, well, I'm just going to hold on to everything I get, because if I do that, then, I'll gain wealth. And I just think there's just a fine way through that. You got to be responsible with what is yours, but that has two sides to that responsibility. One is related to generosity, and one is about not just self-service. If I have money, I shouldn't just serve myself with that money. I should probably do something with it. But I also can't just I also can't just do fun things for me because I have it. I think you have to kind of walk that line, and it's not easy to do. But I think if you set that out there, that's how you want to be and who you want to be, it definitely makes a difference.
That's so good. Yeah. And I love that vision, because it's bigger than yourself. And, you got a clear vision when you were younger of, this is the kind of person I want to be. I want to be a generous person. And then you set some goals and then you start pursuing it. So like, to be intentional on a daily basis in terms of building towards that goal of being generous, then I'm curious of where you started then. So you're coming out of college, and you're like, I want to be the guy who's able to be the generous one, who's able to fill the needs. I think your motives were great. Your vision was great.
Yeah.
How did you do it? Where did you go from there?
For me, and this may not be the case for everybody, but for me, I wanted to take the gifts of who I am, which I think everyone that meets me would say I have no risk meter. Like, it's totally broken. As Dave Ramsey might talk about, like, I don't have a risk meter. It doesn't function. It's flatlined. There's nothing there that I'm not willing to try. But the other piece of it was recognizing that I think most people that also know me would say I'm one of the more creative people they've ever met, in that I have a broad spectrum of stuff that I look at, and I see the world through very creative eyes. And I took those two things and said, okay, well, that can serve me well. I never sat down and said, when I want to be a political science major or a marine biologist, I never said any of that stuff. When I went to college, I actually didn't know what I wanted to be. And back in my time, you could go to college and not just be overwhelmed with debt to your eyeballs, right? So I felt like college was a good chance to kind of explore some of that space, but the schooling portion of it was frankly useless. Like I have a theology degree. I don't do much with that anymore, other than I'm in the church. I serve the church, try to mentor younger guys, do stuff like that. But I don't have any. I don't sit down in the morning and like, how did I use my theology degree today? It isn't like that. So I kind of went and figured out that those talents were there, that creativity was really the core of what I wanted to be. And then I said, that's cool. I'm going to try to use that to maximum potential. So I don't really care what the job is. It doesn't matter to me if I'm digging ditches or if I'm, if you ask my family, my immediate family, my wife and my kids, they're always like, you have done more things in our lifetime together than most people do, like 10 lifetimes.
Yeah.
And there was kind of a funny moment. We were driving around in our car, and my wife was like, hey, let's name all the things you've done since we've been married. And we kind of started doing that. We got to the end of it, and my oldest son in the back was like, don't forget the trailers. And it's this funny moment because we actually had a business for a second where we rented out campers and we tried to do this whole VRBO thing with campers. It turned out to be really successful, but it was almost like an afterthought in my head. I didn't even remember that I had done it because it was just, it was part of what I like doing. It was a creative solution. I'm totally ambitious towards those things. It doesn't bother me at all to be ambitious. It's another funny story from college, but we were doing a Christmas program, and the choir teacher said, does anybody in here play bass? And I had never picked up a bass, but I had played guitar. And I said, yeah, I do. Absolutely, I do. And then she said, oh, can you play a stand-up bass? I said, you betcha. You bet I can. And then she said, can you bow a stand-up bass? And I said, it might take me a minute to brush up on that, but I'm sure I can do that. And I did. I ultimately ended up doing all that in the concert. And it's just sort of an illustration of like, don't limit yourself. I think that's one of the things that I find amongst people my age and younger is that we just build these self-limitation ceilings on our world because it feels too scary. We don't have the money. We can't do what we want to do. And so we just stop ourselves before we ever get started. Somebody told me once, there's a great idea born every 15 seconds, but it takes somebody to move that idea somewhere to get off the couch and do it. And that's very rare. And especially amongst our generation and younger, my generation and younger, I should say.
Our generation.
we just don't get off the couch. And so I think that's something that has served me really well to say, I'm gonna get an idea. I'm going to try it. I've failed. Like I have actually failed miserably in my life on that stuff to the tune of numbers that I don't even want to talk about failure kind of thing in terms of dollars. But at the end of the day, I'm alive. I've got 4 amazing kids. I got an awesome wife. I get to play music still. I get to do things with interactions with people and friends and all of that stuff that failure is just, it's not something to be afraid of, even if the number's tremendous. I mean, even if the cash that gets in, it might be easy for me to say that because of who I am and where I've come from. But I just don't think failure is something that we should be so terrified of. And yet that's how most of us live.
Yeah, for sure.